Welcome to Whiskey Gaming, and this is my late review of Stellar Blade. I played on the PS5 because PS5 exclusive. So let's get into the story. You play as Eve. She has been sent back to an Earth that has basically been ravaged by a race of alien mutant things called the Natiba. Unfortunately, during this big offensive, things go horribly wrong, and she has to be rescued by a guy named Adam. Adam and Eve, yeah, I know. They end up going to the last human city, Zion, and they basically launch their offensive. Eve is essentially on her own. The rest of the angels she was with are all gone. Angels being a nickname for Eve and her kind who are sent to Earth by the previous Earthlings to, try and take it back. And I'm gonna say, I enjoy the story. It's not anything that was necessarily mind-shattering to me. Some of the twists and turns I saw coming. Some of them were kind of boring and predictable, honestly. But let's move forward on to the audio. And the first thing I'm gonna say is some of the voiceover work is very dead, like reading a book, and there's not a lot of personality attached to it. Where some of it is well done. I will say most of it tends to land over the top, which actually really works with the style of game because it is very much an over the top game. But my favorite thing in the audio is the music. While I don't necessarily love every single song, I do like a lot of the songs, and I like that when you're just running around doing side missions, doing whatever, just running around the world, which some areas of the world are fairly large, there's background music. This music is playing and you can actually hear and experience, and I know that doesn't fit with every single game out there, but I have played plenty of games where you're running around exploring and it's just dead silent, and it would really benefit from some background music. So having it here in Stellar Blade, I really enjoyed. It may be a small thing, but it's a very welcome thing in my opinion. As for the sound effects, they work. They work very well with the combat, they work for the creatures, they work for the sci-fi elements that are in the game. I mean, it is actually a sci-fi game, so they are sufficiently sci-fi for it. Let's get onto the gameplay mechanics and whatnot, and Stellar Blade is an action RPG, action-adventure kind of game, and the combat is very Soulsborne in my opinion. I'm not going to 100% say this is a Soulsborne, but it does feel very similar. Mostly in the way that you do the combat, it's very much based on if you screw up, you can very easily die. Healing takes a bit of time, so risk reward, a good dodge, a good block, a good counter can really change the tide of a fight, which is very Soulsborne in my mind. It's also not, you're fighting hordes and hordes of enemies at a time. That would be easy. You survive it, no problem. This is, if you screw up in a even smaller fight, you could get wrecked kind of situation, and there's a big focus on boss fights. I will say it started out considerably easier than I was expecting. Most boss would take 2, maybe 3 tries, your first try always being your best try for some reason until you finally succeed. But then I did reach a point where the game took a kind of startling leap in difficulty. Maybe it was just me, maybe I just wasn't in the zone, but I hit an area where I was getting wrecked far more frequently than I had in the past, and it kind of threw me off. Now, unlike Soulsborne's, this game very much throws its side missions and side activities directly at you. They're not hidden away. As well as you then also have your main mission, your main objectives, which progress the story. One thing I did enjoy was the little stories attached to the variety of side missions, the bulletin board, just all of that I enjoyed. I think they did a good job bringing character to the world and to the other characters through these side missions. Now, admittedly, like so many side missions, there's limited variety and plenty of them to do. I do wish there were more weapons. You get one weapon that you can upgrade, and you get plenty of upgrades, and leveling is handled in an interesting way. You get XP, which allows you to dump points into abilities, essentially, not health and so on. Like unlocking the ability to counter after a perfect dodge or a perfect guard, etc. Now, you can upgrade your health and your healing items and your equipment, or how much equipment you can equip. And that's done through collecting of items and progressing throughout and unlocking ways to equip more. But you find a certain number of weapon cores, you increase the damage of your weapon. You get a drone, and you can upgrade your drone and what it can fire or how far it can scan, etc. just through finding items. And we've all seen it. There are a ton of costumes and whatnot. I'm sure I didn't really scratch the surface because I was just kind of trying to haul through the game as much as I could to review it. But I did think that was cool, and they clearly put a good amount of effort and thought into those outfits. And overall, I was actually really enjoying the gameplay so much more than I was anticipating. I am actually surprised by that. Let's move on to the controls. And overall, I didn't have a problem with the controls. I think they worked well. I thought they were generally responsive. I will say, once I entered that harder zone, for whatever reason, my counterattacks weren't always triggering, and it wasn't my controller, so I don't know what was going on with that. But there was a specific boss fight that I was in where I would get a perfect dodge and I would hold down triangle to do my counterattack and it would do nothing. Like, it wouldn't activate at all, which that was problematic for me. And the weird thing is, that was the only time I was running into that issue. I went and did an optional boss fight and I didn't have any problems with my counterattacks triggering. So I'm not sure what that was, but it happened to me repeatedly in that boss fight. So I don't know. But I do kind of have to lump it in here because I was having problems with it responding at that time. The rest of the time, my movement was good. It's not quite as fine as you would want when there's a lot of objects to interact with, like at the camp. You can accidentally trigger the wrong thing in the camp because your movement's not as precise as it could be. Although that is really honestly very minor, because when you're running, jumping, fighting, I didn't have a lot of problems with it. There was one bit of platforming where that lack of precision was affecting me. So it is there and it can be noticeable at times, but the majority of the time didn't have a big problem with it. Let's move on to the graphics and visuals, and this is a good looking game. I'm not gonna say that it's not. I think the world itself is fantastic. I really enjoy the design of like the first city and seeing what the world was before the Natibas. Whereas a lot of the rest of the game is desert and ruins and, you know, fairly stereotypical post-apocalyptic shit. And not super original in those areas. There is some cool design elements throughout it that remind you the world that you are in. Then you have your Natibas, which I think are really actually fairly cool designs. They really do look like some awesome like alien monsters, and I really enjoyed that. And there's a good variety actually. I mean, yes, there are some reused enemies. There are some enemies that you will see in basically every zone you go to, but each zone you go to tends to have at least a few of its own unique enemies, which I enjoyed. The boss designs I think are pretty awesome, and brutal is a good way I would describe them. This game is not shy with being violent or gory or any of that. And then let's just address it. Eve is kind of a dress-up doll for you. At least a lot of the commercials seem to sell on Eve's sex appeal as a character, and this game doesn't really shy away from that at all. A lot of the costumes can be very provocative. It's kind of hard to argue with that. But I do think that Eve is actually a pretty cool designed character. Some of the outfits are actually just really cool. And honestly, as silly as it may sound, I really dug on some of Adam's costumes. I thought those were very well designed. Although I will say that I feel like his character, or maybe it was just the facial model during the recording sessions, had zero expression. But that does kind of drag down that character and make them seem more boring than they should be. As for the animations during the combat, I was really impressed by those. I thought those were very well done, and I love the special effects during combat, whether it's the enemy's special attacks, your special attacks, the dodging, any of that I think is actually very cool. And as dumb as it is, but one of my favorite bits of animation slash gameplay is no matter what side of the ladder you jump on, if you jump on the wrong side, Eve will self-correct and just climb over to the other side, which I love, instead of climbing all the way up a ladder and finding I was on the wrong side. Always annoying. And yes, I know that's a silly little thing to love, but I did love it. So to get into the wrap up, I honestly wasn't expecting much from this game. I basically assumed, based on the trailers, that it was all about Eve's boobs and butt. And really, it's not. There is so much more to this game, and while that is an element, there is this kind of throwback to an over-sexualization of a female character. The game around that is actually a lot of fun, and I found myself really enjoying the experience overall. So as much as I didn't expect this, I do fully recommend this game. I had a lot of fun with it. I was really enjoying the experience, and I want to sink more time into it. Okay, in the comments down below, why don't you tell me, was there ever a game where you looked at it and you're like, ooh, that seems kind of gimmicky and cheesy and shitty, and then you ended up playing it and really enjoying it? And as always, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please hit that like button, and if you like what I'm doing in general, share and subscribe. Have a good one.